Welcome back to another episode of the Frame Found Podcast. I am your host, Chris Tinsley, and for this week's episode, we're going to be talking about work management platforms and all of the features and the functionality of it, and how that kind of creates some friction when teams are using a platform such as a work management platform. It's just a very interesting thing, as I've seen kind of throughout my years with clients and colleagues. All these work management platforms, they're getting a lot more advanced. There's a lot of overlap in between them. The user experience and the user interfaces are different. There's pros and cons to all of it. Then you layer on top of, the whole AI component of it, and Claude is a big thing now, and just kind of experimenting with that and seeing what other people are doing. It's pretty wild just being able to generate a dashboard or a report of something. It's just pretty crazy. Like, I feel like that could be a whole separate episode about what some of those examples are, and then talking with some people in the SaaS industry, just looking at the concept of scalability and all that. And I'm realizing I'm ranting now, and just to kind of preface, this week's episode, if you have tuned in to previous ones, I'm kind of changing the format a little bit, where I'm going to kind of I have a barrage of questions that I worked with chat on to kind of just help kind of keep the exploration of the overarching topic kind of in check, so I don't go too far down a rabbit hole. However, I will, seeing as it's me, I'll always do that. But I'll always bring it back through, in terms of a through line. But I'm seeing myself ranting right now. So in the spirit of just keeping with the structure of the show and kind of what I just told you, let's just get started. Question number one: what are people actually buying when they buy a work management platform? Interesting question. And there's also a sub question here that I really like. Is it improved visibility? Is it improved coordination, more control, more accountability, or are they buying the feeling that work will finally make sense? I think it's the latter. I think, and I don't mean that as like a bad thing. I mean it as what I've noticed, and I don't even know if I prefaced this in the start of the show, but there's a governance component to it, right? Like, and I think, I think I was in this camp at one point in time where, I don't even know how to like summarize this. Like, you look at what these tools and platforms are able to do, and it makes sense, like conceptually, like you're reading about a feature, right? And it makes total sense. And if you understand the functional, how you would apply a principle in order to leverage the output of a feature, it makes sense. But like if you have like a functional understanding, right? Like, for instance, right? What's a good example is capacity planning or a workload chart, right? Like understanding, the concept, like the concept of a duration, right? A start date and an end date of a task, of a project, of whatever, right? And then understanding the concept of a level of effort, whether it's expressed in points or in hours or a percentage, whatever, right? But then applying that relative to a duration, whether it's a fixed amount each day or if it's kind of split in between days, right? That's the type of input that is needed in order to, kind of roll things up into a total, so then you could make an assessment and see like, oh, X, Y, and Z person is booked out for X amount of time or percentage or points or whatever over the course of X amount of time. And it's like nobody understands, or it's not so much that nobody understands, but nobody appreciates how much work goes into that type of stuff. And a lot of people, and then some people do understand and appreciate it, but then they don't know how to shortcut and create templates or rate cards or whatever you want to call it, right? So then they just get overwhelmed with the amount of information that they have to catalogs, right? So you have these different camps of these people who, don't even have a functional understanding of a feature. But that's one camp, I guess. Another camp is that they understand the functional part of it, right? But they don't understand how to get that type of information, and especially at scale, or to manage or wrangle it. And I feel like I'm going kind of down a rabbit hole. So let me kind of walk this whole thing back. I think it's just people buy these platforms because more often than not, they see it, they have a functional understanding of it, but there's stuff that's happening behind the curtain. There's a governance component, right? There's understanding how people like even understand the principle of, for instance, a workload chart or a capacity plan, what have you, right? But they may not know how to use the tool in order to apply that principle. And so there's like shortcomings and there's gaps everywhere. Maybe that's not the right term, but it just creates a lot of friction, and especially at scale. And it's like, oh God, this could just be whole other episodes, just like Claude and Chat and just other like AIs, like a Perplexity. Like these tools still require some sort of input in order to kind of synthesize that information. Like if you don't, more often than not, Claude's going to want some type of a template, right? Like if you have a like a particular like project type or a job type, and you care about the level of effort, then you're going to have, Claude's still going to look for that as an input, right? So you're still going to have to, it's even just understanding that how do you apply the principles of a work breakdown structure, I guess, would maybe be the best thing that comes to mind, and associating a level of effort to those things. Like AI still needs that information. And it's like, what I'm just finding is that people don't even understand the importance of that, or like why it's important, and then how to apply it at scale. So I just think it's a very fascinating era that we're walking into, and it's for me, it's kind of exposing a lot of like misunderstanding of principles. And you guys know me, like shameless jujitsu analogies, and I feel like I kind of just even as I'm talking right now, I'm like, what I'm thinking about in terms of that is like, it's just, you could watch like a move, for instance, on like a YouTube or whatever, right? There's endless amounts of it, right? And like, yeah, somebody could go and like teach you that move maybe, but like, there's so many counters to a move. There's like nuances associated to it. And if you don't understand what the nuances are, or like why the move works and where there are gaps in it, right? Then you just don't know how to adapt. Like as the factors change, you don't know how to adapt to it because you don't have a fundamental understanding of why the move works in the first place. And I feel like that's something that I'm seeing a lot when it comes to work management. And even my thoughts on the topic and when to apply certain principles or configurations, it's constantly changing, because as new and new factors are introduced, you've got to kind of retailer your game to that, right? But at the end of the day, no matter what, what's the most important is understanding principles and fundamentals, right? So then you can change those things. Anyways, I don't know. Let's just move on to question number 2. Why do these platforms get more impressive as software while getting misused inside real teams? Again, I think it's a governance component. It's a teaching component. It goes back to principles. It goes back to the fundamentals. If you had to manage work at scale with a pen and paper and a phone, let's just say, whatever, like, I think it's important to kind of look at how things work from the most rudimentary sense, and when to use certain work objects, whether it's tasks and subtask projects within a folder, within a program or a campaign or a portfolio, right? Like these are all like, they're like a building block, right? They're all these kind of ingredients or these components to help organize and orchestrate work. And it's like, even as I just say that, right? Like, and again, they're arbitrary terms, different teams use them in a different sense, but like even just understanding that like there's a certain time and place to use each of those components. I've found, in my professional career that, there's some teams that just don't even understand when to use certain components at certain times. And it's really important to understand like best practices of like an industry, of like a fundamental, of like a principle, like whatever you want to call it. But it's just like, I feel like with technology, if you don't know how to use it, it's just going to make things harder because, again, you don't understand the principle, right? So why do these platforms get more impressive as software while still getting misused inside real teams? It's just a misapplication of principles. Next question. At what point does more functionality stop helping and start creating confusion? God, almost immediately. It's so interesting that, like, if you have a platform or a tool that's got more, I guess, call it bells and whistles, you know, yeah, it becomes a problem. I don't know. The first thing, like the thing that's in my head right now is like when automation, at least as like an end user with kind of like a WYSIWYG kind of editor, like a what you see is what you get kind of editor thing, right? Where it just became easier for people to create automations. And it started to kind of expose, even in my own thinking, right? Like, is this even a thing to automate like this? Is automation going to make it more confusing? Do I create more risk because there's so many like edge cases that the automation won't trigger properly, so therefore I can't trust it? And then it's like, how do you work around that? You know, we can talk about the concepts of like briefs and request forms and like rule-based routing and such. It's just interesting. It's just interesting. There's a lot of edge cases, and it's just knowing like when something should be used in a certain way, how questions, you know, are formed, how should a system truly operate. I don't know. I'm just gonna move on because I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole on that one. But let's just drive this point home. At what point does more functionality stop helping and start creating confusion? If you don't know the principles, it's immediately. Question number 4, why do teams keep expecting the platform to solve problems that are really operating problems? Sub-question, what are the things no tool can fix on its own? Bottom line is like going back to that kind of, I wouldn't call it an analogy, like going back to like the pen and paper, right? Like if you can't even on pen and paper kind of explain what the workflow is of your work, no platform's going to solve that. Like platforms just amplify what's kind of already existing, right? So like if your process is broken, then the platform's just going to amplify that, and people are very quick to blame the platform and, you know, not the operating model. And it's just funny, like I grew up like as a blader, a skater, just like rollerblading. I'm going to date myself, but like the movie like Brink, like on ramps and stuff like that. Anyways, that's a part of my life in my past. But it's interesting as I'm reading that question and I'm looking back to a different part of my life where like people would always blame the skates, right? That they couldn't land a trick or whatever, right? And it's always a funny thing because you give that pair to another person or you see a pro that, you know, is using that skate and they obviously have no problem, right? So it's not a tool problem. It's not like a hardware problem. It's the user. It's what you're kind of like using the tool like with or for, like if it's the person or the team or the process or whatever, right? I just think, let's just read that one back. Why do teams keep expecting the platform to solve problems that are really operating problems? Why do teams keep expecting the platform to solve problems? Just even reading that question, it's like nobody has an understanding of the delineation between, I guess maybe in this case, like, I don't know if software and hardware is a good analogy. Or maybe they're starting to turn the corner. I don't know, but like that's just an interesting question because it's just like, oh, the tool doesn't work, and it's like, no, it's not the tool. It's the application of the workflow or the process or whatever you want to call it. Let's just move on to the next question. What fundamentals do you need to understand before any platform is actually useful? Sub-question. Things like, or call it like a statement. Things like ownership, workflow, decision-making, handoffs, priorities, capacity, and what done even means. Yeah, I think all of those things are definitely applicable. I think something that I'm finding now, especially in 2026, is the scale and complexity of work is that I'd almost like add to this list like work breakdown structure or level of effort. You know, what's a task as opposed to a project, to a campaign, to a program, to a portfolio, right? Like, I think just even understanding those things, right? I think, what chat is mentioning here is on a very like tactical level in terms of the governance component, or more of a governance component on how work is managed in terms of SOWs and triage and RACIs and all that. But I think there's even an overarching like operating component of like altitudes, like let's just say, and the difference between like strategic kind of like planning and like tactical execution. That's a whole other episode for another day, but let's just keep this thing moving. Question number 6, what happens when a team implements features before it has defined how work should move? Wow, that one's fascinating. I think something that I've noticed in recent years is the difference between kind of strategic planning, like macro planning, relative to like tactical execution, and people trying to create one configuration in one tool or multiple tools, whatever, or let's just look at it like configuration, trying to create one configuration that like solves for both problems of like the strategic and the tactical. And one wants to plan things out, soup to nuts from the jump, even though there's not a lot of inputs or not all the inputs are available. There's different teams that want to work on the rolling wave, and that creates some friction if people don't understand when to apply certain approaches. What happens when a team implements features before it has defined how work should move? I mean, the system just collapses. People get upset. There's friction. In some cases there's like infighting. But it's such a fascinating thing to me. Just understanding the difference between strategy and tactics, or just altitudes in general. Let's just keep moving. Why is structure more important now, not less, as these platforms become more powerful? The term's even escaping me right now as I'm talking, but like how to like structure your data, that's like something that's very new. It's something I've always known in order to kind of like glean insights from it. But like now with like AI in 2026, and especially like with Claude, right? Like it can crawl so much information and synthesize things in like a beautiful way, so long as what it's crawling or looking at is structured in a way that makes sense, that it can kind of interpret that information. And I think, I don't know, like a loose kind of thought, it's kind of tangenting a little bit, but like there's like skill sets that I'm starting to see that are becoming more and more of a necessity in the workforce, where like, I don't know, it's like, I guess for me, of like my era, right? Like when you look at like a resume, for instance, right? Where like, you put in your skills or the applications or like the tools that like a Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or Excel or whatever, right? Like at a point in time, like that was important for people to know, and important for like potential, employers, that they know that these platforms. And it might just be my era or my generation, but that to me is a given. Like if you don't know how those things work or how to use them, like that's a problem. And I can't help but feel that moving into, more into 2026 and beyond, that having an understanding of how to structure information is going to become like a standard of such. How to use AI is clearly going to be a standard. And I would go as far as to say even like task management and work management, like just even from like a functional like level is important. Yeah, I don't know. I think, why is structure more important now, not less, as these platforms become more powerful? Why does capability increase the need for clearer thinking? These are all just tools. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. I feel like I maybe talked about this in like previous episodes, but it's like, if you look at it like power tools, right? Like, you know, when to use a screwdriver, like a manual. I forgot what the even term is for like just a screwdriver, relative to a drill, or relative to a power drill, or to an impact driver, right? Like what are the applications of those things? When do you and do you not use those things? Whether that be just classic screwdriver or impact driver or a power drill, right? Because you don't want to like strip the screws, you don't want to like drive a hole through something, on accident because you had too much power, or, you're trying to put something together and it's taking you forever because, you're just using a classic screwdriver when you should be using a power tool of sorts. So I don't know, that was kind of a tangent of an analogy, but I just think people don't know how to use the tools that they have. And I think that that's really important. And it's very evident that there needs to be thought behind, again, from like a paper and pen perspective, right? Like, what is the process? How do we want the work to flow? And then you use tools to augment that. All right, let's keep it moving. How do people confuse customization with maturity? Just because a platform can be configured 100 different ways, does that mean the team knows what it's doing? Same thing. I mean, you gotta strip everything back to the fundamentals. I always suggest to teams, start with like pen and paper. Um, and if you want to incorporate a feature or a function, if you want to utilize a feature for a function, you really need to understand the pros and the cons of doing it in a certain way. Like, again, like automation, which I already touched on. It's a fascinating one, right? Because if you have too many edge cases, you need to like look at, okay, well, automation isn't going to fix this. In fact, it's probably going to make it worse. And if that's the case, then what else can we modify in order to achieve the outcome that we want? And I think that that takes a lot of patience. I think a lot of teams get frustrated because they have a point of view, but they're not seeing another team's point of view. And I think that that's, I don't know, it's a puzzle. And maybe I just enjoy these things because of the nature of the fact that it is a puzzle. And I don't know, I find that kind of interesting and fun, whatever. Let's just keep it moving so I don't go down a rabbit hole. What's the difference between tracking work and managing work? Why do so many teams build systems that document activity but don't improve execution? I don't know. I think that one's interesting. What's the difference between tracking work and managing work? I don't know. I feel like that could turn into a whole different topic of, like the human component of like managing like cooperative endeavors. And it doesn't even matter if it's like in a professional sense. It's really just kind of like in any sense, like, you could have this amazing to-do list or this amazing tracker, right? But if you can't rally teams around getting the thing done, then it doesn't really matter. I think I'm going to kind of skip over that question because I do have a lot of thoughts on it, and I know for a fact I'm going to tangent on it. So let's move on to the next one. What should leaders be paying attention to when they evaluate these platforms? Sub comment, sub whatever. Not just the feature sets, but whether the tool fits how the organization actually works. Okay, what should leaders be paying attention to when they evaluate these platforms? It's so interesting. A lot of these platforms, like the UX, the UI, all the features, like they're all there. And they kind of treat them in somewhat like a different way. And maybe some platforms are more robust than other ones, but like, I don't know. I'm just a big fan of like UX and UI. I don't know. I always think that the iPhone is a very interesting comparison, I guess. Like, it's a phone just like any other one. Arguably, it has the same functions as other ones. Maybe some are better, quote unquote, than others, but even then, so like as time goes on, they just kind of start to almost become equivalents in terms of like the features and the functions. But that's where like UX and UI kind of starts to set things apart, right? Because like if I'm filming this thing on an iPhone, I'm looking at this iPhone, and just hardware wise, there's so much complexity. Like my brain is just baffled as to what is going on hardware wise within this thing, right? But then you have this interface that's very user friendly, and you know, I don't know. Because I'm just like looking at the phone now, and like, you could look at like apps that are on the phone, I guess, and there's different levels of complexity. I mean, like content creation is such a thing now, and I'm gravitating towards certain platforms just merely because of the UX and UI. Oh, I guess also some of the features in it. I don't know. How do I bring this one back home? What should leaders be paying attention to when they evaluate these platforms? I think if I had to answer this question in a very direct way, it's just really understand what your team is looking for, and have a very strong functional understanding of what those things are. And like, even if you don't know what things are, that's totally fine. We have tools like AI, like just have a conversation with chat just to get a summary of what these things are, right? I think, and this could be a whole other episode for like another day, but I don't think that these things are as complicated as people are making them out to be. Like I could start making things super complicated by like saying like, critical path and like a burn down and a burn up and a level of effort and, a dependency chain, like a start and like an FF and like an FS and like an SF and, a lead time and a lag time. I could say things like a Gantt chart and like a roadmap and like a product roadmap and portfolios and campaign. Like I could make this stuff as confusing as possible, right? I could literally just use all those terms to make it confusing. But if I really wanted to connect with you or the person that I'm having the conversation with, I'm going to draw analogies to like other things and I don't know. I just think, I think what I'm trying to say is this: if you're a leader and you're trying to understand what to look out for when adopting these types of platforms, get a consensus from your team on what they're looking for, have a conversation with chat to just understand what those things are from a functional perspective, and then have a conversation, with the company that you're looking to get that product from, right? And they'll help you out too. So that's the best way to answer that question. I just think I read that, mine started going everywhere else, and again, that's some, other ideas for another episode. Let's keep it moving. What are the warning signs that a team is overbuilding inside the platform? Sub-comment here: too many fields, too many statuses, too many automations, too much admin, not enough clarity. Yeah, yes to all of that. I think the warning signs. At the moment that there's like friction and infighting and everybody's like standing their ground on something, like that should be a sign to you as a leader that this isn't a platform problem. And in fact, maybe trying to adopt the platform, it's almost like a blessing because it exposed that you have an operating problem. Like these teams clearly don't know how to work with each other, right? So again, take the platform completely out of it, right? Like, are you managing work in a bottoms up approach, or are you doing it like in a top down? Do you have like a PMO team? Do you have some sort of like strategic roadmap that like triggers certain projects or campaigns to launch, right? How do those, and that's more of like a top down, right? Or is there just like institutional knowledge where people just know when certain projects like need to start and end? So therefore you're kind of taking like a bottoms up approach, but now you don't have a holistic view. And that's a different way of going about that. So I think, what are the warning signs that a team is overbuilding inside the platform? The moment that there's friction, that's when you know you're building the wrong thing. Like, that's when you got to like take the tool out of it, have a conversation. How do you want this work to actually operate? Next question. What does useful application actually look like? I think it's the opposite. It's as soon as you have like harmony and flow, then you know that you've done it right? Like when the system kind of like sings, you know, it in like almost like a decentralized way. Yeah, that's when you know that you got the configuration right. So I don't mean to make it as simple as that. I think maybe I'm making it as simple as that because for the sake of conversation or for the sake of like clarity, but like the moment that there's friction, you're doing something wrong. The moment it becomes almost like invisible and light in the hand, then you're doing something right. That's the best way to put it. What's the real point here? Okay, what does chat have to say about this? What's the real point here? That as work management platforms keep evolving, the advantage doesn't go to the team with the most features. It goes to the team that understands the fundamentals well enough to apply those features on purpose. Fascinating, kind of creepy. So just to let you guys know, I'm filming a couple of episodes in one day just so I can kind of have stuff in the hopper, and just got done with the previous episode, and I was just kind of had like a thought. I was like, hey, I kind of want to do like an episode on this. And actually, I guess it did kind of like take my prompt and like reposition it in such a way. But it's just exactly like what chat wrote here. Like, what's the real point here? That is work management platforms, or sorry, the question is, what's the real point here? Subtext. That is work management platforms keep evolving. The advantage doesn't go to the team with the most features. It goes to the team that understands the fundamentals well enough to apply those features on purpose. 100% that. Thank you, chat, for, you know, synthesizing that in such a way. I think that's it. I don't know. This is kind of weird. Again, I'm kind of changing the format of the show. I don't know. Screw it. I'll just say it because it's here, because I do think it's kind of interesting. But like, here's like an optional closing line of the episode, but I do think it is interesting. The line is, the tools are getting better. That doesn't remove the need for operational clarity. It makes it more important. Totally agree with that. And again, thank you, chat, for synthesizing that sentence. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I guess in terms of, my actual thoughts, just, you've heard me say it throughout this whole episode, and you've heard me say it in a bunch of other episodes, but like an understanding of like the fundamentals of principles, whatever you want to call it, is so important. And especially in 2026 and onward, it's like hypercritical, just because of AI and, expectations, of like how to like manage work and how to use these platforms. Like, it's really important. It's almost like things have gotten so complex that it's almost like going back to basics, like as a default. I don't know, maybe there's like kind of an episode there, but I do think it's really interesting because like I've just noticed it throughout my career where it's just like, these are all, I guess the reason why I'm so passionate, I don't really like that word. I guess passionate, we'll just say that, fine. About this stuff is because I've lived through all of this, and it's so interesting having been through all of that for like a good part of my career in entering, the era of AI. It's something that I've always known it to be important, and now it's becoming like blaringly obvious, like worldwide, like industry wide, that an understanding of principles and and fundamentals is more important, like is important more now than ever. And I feel like I'm just sound like a broken record at this point, just kind of saying that over and over again. So I think I'm just going to use that as my off ramp for this show or for this episode. Yeah. Appreciate you guys checking out this episode. I'll put some links to some other episodes here. Try to find some that relate closer to this topic. But much like other episodes, I would ask you guys to maybe like leave some comments in the comment section, just kind of what parts of this episode resonated with you. I would really love to hear kind of what's on your guys' mind, and the goal I would have is to kind of like look at those comments and create an episode that kind of answers some of, you know, those thoughts. I think there's so many things to explore regarding the topic of organizational effectiveness, you know, and that can be in you know, a professional context and in like a personal context, whatever. Just like, I don't know. There's so many like rabbit holes to explore, which is kind of fun. I mean, it is really fun, but it's also just, it's a gargantuan amount of them. But anyways, I just kind of want to know what resonates with you guys, be helpful for me. And I don't know, would really like to address any, I would just love to do an episode that addresses the thoughts that you guys have. So I'm just going to end it right there. I think that's a good place to end. And yeah, I don't know, guys. Thanks for just checking out this week's episode. And yeah, hope to see you guys next week. Thanks, everybody.